I just wanted to mention Barbara, who came on, who I just met recently as well. And she's up here and she does a lot of substitute teaching. So I don't know, Barbara, if you're comfortable, like sort of just giving us a sense of what's happening in your world here and what you're, I think you had mentioned you weren't going to go back for now.
No, I'm not going back right now. But I have been talking to teachers who have gone back, and the stress level is beyond the roof. It's crazy. And the things that they're being forced to do, whether they want to or not. And I just can't even imagine what the kindergarten teachers are going through. I mean, because all of kindergarten is about learning to play with others and cooperative learning and centers, and now the kid's given a bucket of toys and has to sit by himself or herself. It's like totally against everything that they do. And I just don't want anything to do with it right now.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And but some people, that's their livelihood, and it's really, really, it's a really tough time. And I know Sanya joined a little bit later too. And as a parent, I don't know how you're feeling with what's going on. But this is this is why I think it's so important that we, have this openness and getting to the issues, like how can we cope? Like really, we have to cope as parents first and then help others. And then in the nature of our workplaces, like Taylor, back to work is our next topic, but it's like so much going on. And with now in Ontario, we have some cases rising too. So, Sanya, how are you feeling about things? Like you're back to work, I think a couple of days, and you're one of your children are back to school, but I think you're doing online. I can't remember what you decided, if you were doing in person or not.
Yeah, so I'm back to work full time, and my daughter, she is in grade 2. She's learning from home. So it is tough because, they need to study by themselves. Right now, I know the online learning is really starting next week with which is a teacher guided learning. But right now she's home and just doesn't know what to do, and I need to be back in office. It's a tough time. My role as a parent has increased. I need to make sure she's learning and just not watching TV. She knows there's homework, but smaller kids, they need guidance as to how to do their projects, what to search for. So she's trying to manage things by herself, and her dad at home is helping her out. But we are so busy in our work that it's difficult to manage both. So the role of parent, I think, has changed, and need to spend more time and make sure they're not going through a tough time, or not getting not being anxious about how things are operating now. So she wants to go to school, she wants to meet her friends, but we need to be careful of that aspect as well, while learning should continue. So let's see how things go, and trying to make the best of what we can.
Yeah. So Cynthia, I'll ask you now, if is there something you think is a good practice for parents or educate everybody really these days, that you would recommend for those times where not only as, us, self-care, but things that we can do with maybe, doesn't matter what age. Is there differences for younger children, what you can do as strategies versus, the high school age where you are? And, I just wondered what your thoughts are on some mindful practices, or just even, ways of coping given your background. If you could share a few tips for us, that'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. So some of the things that immediately come up, especially, from this conversation, but other conversations I've been having, is these are not what I share with mindfulness. They seem very simple. Like they're going to be like, oh yeah, of course I could do that. But they're not easy, because they're not a natural habit for us. Our brains are wired to go to the negative and to look at the deficit instead of the positive. And then the other thing I tell people is that mindfulness is not just about being positive either. It's not like all rainbows and sunshine. It's just saying, this is what's happening right now. So right now, if you realize that your student or your daughter or your son is feeling stressed, how can you reduce that in this moment instead of focusing on, well, this assignment is due next week or this assignment is due, in an hour. It's like, how do you feel right now? Can you tell me on a scale of 1 to 3, do you feel, like great, or are you at a 1? And that's when those moments of pause start to come in. The other thing that keeps coming up is because teachers and parents have different perspectives of this, there's a lot of blame and guilt and judgment that comes up on both sides. And it's not intentional. I know a lot of parents are like, I'm for the teachers. I don't want them to go back either. But the teachers are being forced by administrations and whatever. So I think that reminder to yourself, like, we are all in this together, even if your situation looks different for me, or you choose different. Like Helen, you shared that your son is actually reporting for in-person learning. And for some people that brings up a difficult emotion, like, why are you letting them go back? And, teachers are being forced to come back because of parents like you. Like, there's a lot of tension there. But if both sides could just pause and say, we're all confused right now. This is hard for all of us. And how to just turn back to focusing on what you are doing, what is working for you, not everybody else, not the teachers, even not the other parents, but for you and your student in that moment, what is working. So yeah, those present moment practices of checking in, hand on heart, taking a deep breath, those are very simple, but they do take practice. It would have to be something that you see working with your student or your own child, because they're not natural practices. Like brushing your teeth, your kids learn how to do that very easily, but taking a deep breath is something that they have to kind of learn how to do. Does that kind of help? Or
Oh no, yeah, that's fantastic. And I think you're right, because as much as we say we're all in this together and everybody's impacted, but there are some differences. And we had a long chats about this because my son really wanted to go back to school because he's in grade 8, and so it's his graduating year. But this online for him wasn't great, and the socialization for these boys, like his friend group, it's really, really tough to make that decision. I think at his school, it's 85% are back. That's a huge amount, right? And so, you do worry, like, because they talk about the second wave. So everybody's, and yesterday he came back, and I don't mind sharing, but he was saying he felt his chest was tight yesterday. And like, we have never, like, he and I have always had, like, when he was younger, I used to do like deep breathing with him at night before let's do a little bit of yoga breaths and meditation, like a little bit. And luckily he had a couple teachers that kind of introduced this a little bit. But I said, you know what, let's do some breathing yesterday. Let's hold your hands up in the air. Like, but you need to talk to me. Like, who knows if it's subconscious, right? That maybe it is. And really, we let him, we kind of had long discussions about what was good for the family. But yeah, it's really tough. And I feel really drained. I didn't sleep well this week. And I'm wondering again, is that my own, like, worry coming out and not realizing, right? And that's how I respond, or something that, because I've been sleeping really well finally. And I was like, oh, but yeah, and I mean, Taylor and I have had other discussions too about just, the back to work too, right? It's, if you're at a full time, which is going to be the next topic, it's all woven in together, right? So having those coping mechanisms is really, really important. I'll flip through a bit. I'll probably turn this off soon, but just for those in Ontario, There is a site, and thank you, Taylor, for helping me with this, School Mental Health Ontario. And so that's one. And then for the universities and colleges, there's a great organization called jack.org up here. And they have a ton of mental health supports as well. And they have an affiliation with Kids Helpline, again, so they can call, but that's like for older students that are in university and college. But I found this was really good, just a quick snapshot of, trying to figure out keeping that communication open with the teachers, because they're also, they're worried about coming back, and, how do you have those check-ins and make sure that you're having some dialogue with them as well. So, and here's the thing, Cynthia, one of the things I noticed on here, it said, educators aren't necessarily mental health professionals, right? So how, this is a lot for them to be thinking about, right? Should they be taking that on? Do you feel, and, I'll throw this out there, do you feel that maybe there is more supports required for the educators? That, there has been this shift for mental health, but are the governments or these institutions, if they're private, are they providing the right types of tools and resources for the educators? I'd be curious what your thoughts are on that, Cynthia, and then maybe Barbara can give her view from some of her experience.
Yeah, so unfortunately, no, at least not here in Texas and not in the United States. The conversation's happening more. I was a high school teacher for 14 years, and I told people, I'm quitting 50% because of our focus on standardized testing. That's a whole separate issue. And then 50% because they did not provide mental health resources for teachers and students. There is a catchphrase starting to gain a little bit more traction, and that's teacher trauma. And it's super real. Teachers, absorb all of their students' issues. We always say, like a teacher's heart or teacher's care. And what that looks like is the fact that they can't turn off their brains at the end of the school day. They are worried about, is that kid getting home at night? Are they getting fed at night? Not worried about the homework or the assignments, but their mental well-being and if they're being cared for. In the pandemic, that is only exacerbated because we don't have those face-to-face connections and where you can see a kid and you can see those behaviors showing up. So I've had a lot of my colleagues say, I've tried to call this student 10 times and they've never answered their phone, or they're not emailing me back. They are just missing. They're MIA. They know that they're at home, but because they can't make that connection, it makes them even more worried about what the kid is or is not doing, and chances are that kid may be fine and they're just, kind of saying whatever about school, but the teacher doesn't know that. In teachers' minds, that whole programming to go to the negative, we go to worst case scenario. Mm-hmm. Are they in an abusive situation? Are they being neglected? Or they're not getting what they need? And teachers often take on that responsibility of that mental health check. And so when anytime, and this goes for parents too, anytime you feel that responsibility for somebody else, that takes away from your attention of your own self-care. I went through a mentorship called The Art of Holding Space. So I do book one-on-one client sessions where I lead them through mindfulness practices, or really it's a release for them. Like, this is what's going on and this is what's happening. How can I use mindfulness to address it? I have to mentally sit before my meetings to prepare to take that on, and then know how to leave it at the end of that meeting instead of keeping it with me. Teachers aren't trained to do that. They don't know those release practices, and that it's not technically their responsibility to make all of this okay in the situation. So yeah, I love that y'all have a very specific website that you can go to, and they do take a little bit of the burden off of teachers. I think it's a whole conversation between parents, caregivers, teachers. It's, you know, that phrase, it takes a village. Like, I really think that that's the case here. But yeah, I think the more you become aware of that, the more you understand, like, to kind of back off, like not put so much pressure on the teachers to do everything and more.
Yeah, no, I mean, they have enough going on, right? So that's, I mean, Barbara, when was the last time, were you in the classroom in the spring when the shit hit the fan? Sorry. Yeah, I just noticed that Elizabeth came on, and usually if she's around, you're supposed to put money in a swear jar. So, but were you in the classroom at the time when sort of the lockdown shutdown happened, Barbara?
Actually, I technically retired at the end of November, but then at the same time, I took on what we call long-term occasional, which is like, because they're always short French teachers. So I took on half days, and it initially was supposed to be for like a few weeks, and then it kept getting extended. And the other teacher and I, both of us are retired, and we both are going, how much longer can we do this, right? So we both decided to end at the end of February, and then, you know, thought nothing of it, right? The other teacher was supposed to go till, I think it was like a week after the March break ended, but we just couldn't do it anymore. That was before COVID, right? And then since then, I'm so glad I didn't have to worry about trying to teach online, or like, because especially with French, that was not a priority. And I think that if I was still on, I would be very, very stressed, because just, you know, wondering what your responsibilities are, and that we just had a PD day that was online, fresh professional development, and we were to do these health unit things, health and safety units. And first of all, I was stressing about how to get on because it was a different platform, and I was having troubles getting on. But then one of them is the duty to report. And when Cynthia was talking there, it was like, yes, we are responsible for those kids, to a great degree, because if we think there's something going on and we don't report it, then we're liable. And it's like, to add on to like all the other stresses that we have, like, we're supposed to be more than just a teacher. We're supposed to be like nurses and mental health people, and teaching kids to tie shoes, and like everything that you can think of.
Well, yeah, and thank you for sharing. Sorry, there's a bit of feedback. It's really, I think that I mean, we've been dealing with this, you know, for 6 months, and I just feel like it's growing. You know, everybody's talking about a second wave, and so, you know, that's one of the things, is you have to try to make these decisions. And then, you know, we're also dealing with the workplace side. And it's interesting, before everybody started hopping on, we were talking, Cynthia and I, a little bit about unionized, like a lot of the teachers up here in Canada are unionized. And so they kind of, you know, have restrictions versus, you know, private organizations, private institutions that, you know, maybe have a bit more flexibility. So it's a little bit different. But I find that, yeah, the decision making it's a lot of stress too, to even like, so we keep talking about stress, and to me, I guess this is the thing we're realizing more and more on every aspect, like the supports that are required for everybody's role. And Sanya was on earlier, and she must have probably had an emergency at work, as usual. This is the thing, but she's an HR professional like I am, and you know, the same thing is when you're in these roles of having to deal with everybody else's challenges and the caregiving roles and all of those things tied up. if you forget the self-care, like this week, I didn't get a lot of great sleep, and I can tell, you know, I'm getting a little bit like agitated and, you know, that without that, and I'm glad Taylor's on, you're listening to this, you got to learn early, but just how to manage through this. So the one thing I wanted to also now kind of shift into with Cynthia, and I can share the slides and everything, I'll send it out to the group. I had a few other things in there, but you know, this whole, up here in Canada, we have human rights, we have family status accommodation. And then we also have there's some legislation that was enacted around this COVID about job protection in situations like daycares closing and things like that. So for some of the parents that have the younger kids, they may have that. And so they may need some accommodation. And then, or other you know, potential challenges that make them higher risk, or immune systems or other things like that. So I'd like to know, like, because you're with an institution with the education, but you also have these challenges for as an employer, right? So how are they managing it down in Texas with those kinds of, are they one-off? Secondly, you know, are you seeing that where there's accommodation requests? You know, we'll start with that, Cynthia, and then we can, you know, maybe go around and see if anybody wants to add anything else.
Yeah, the whole accommodation, like, I always feel like the employees here don't have a lot of rights when it comes down to it, because Texas is a right to work state. So you can be let go at any time for any reason, really. There are some private companies with different contracts that you'll sign, and you have a little bit more protection there. But for the general public, it's a right to work state. So even the essential workers, I know that they put wage increases. They did hazard pay. That was a thing. But like for my own position, I'm office staff. That's a hourly pay instead of salary. And that was one of the first things I came to my school board with, was if you're going to force me to go back on campus, why are you still paying me this first wage when I'm basically putting my life at risk now? Like, I should be getting hazard pay. And that was an immediate, like, oh, well, we haven't decided that yet, and we're not sure if we have the funds. Of course, you know, like, our teachers already don't get paid enough. So that's a thing. The union question, we have a couple of unions that teachers can join, but they don't have much power. So they don't have the right to strike or the right to protest, things like that. I've already started saying, like, you know, who do we need to start voting in now to make this change for the future? Because what people are not saying out loud is that this pandemic is the first. Like, this is like our get out of jail free card, and we're not doing a very good job with it, but it could be much, much worse than what it is. So how do we start putting systems in place now, so that way, if and when things get even worse with the second one or the third one or the fourth one. But yeah, coming back to the employer side of it and the employee, the accommodation requests, I myself have been trying to get an accommodation based on anxiety, because it's now technically considered a mental health impairment by definition, because of the lack of sleep and lack of concentration. I'm fine if I'm at home, but if I were to report to campus, I would not be focused. I already know that, because I was there the day we got an email from CDC on March 12th saying one of our students was possibly exposed. And I was the only one of 5. And immediately that we got that email, like at 10:30 in the morning, I didn't do any work the rest of the day, because I was thinking, why aren't they telling more people? Why are we still here on campus? We should be leaving, because we don't know the repercussions of how fast this thing spreads. I started packing up my office that day. They called school off at 3 in the morning the next morning. So teachers didn't have an opportunity to like come up. Kids' backpacks were still left on campus, and that was March 13th. So from that, I knew if we were going to report back to campus, I should request an accommodation. And HR keeps coming back to me saying, I need to prove that I've had this condition. It was pre-existing. And I was like, why does it matter if it was pre-existing? Because it exists now. I am struggling with this now. And we keep going back and forth. So my principal, thankfully, is a little bit more understanding. And she told me, because she doesn't want to lose me, she was like, you're an attendance person. We can't just retrain somebody quickly to replace you. She said, I will not make you come in until the very last possible moment. She goes, but keep pushing for that accommodation, keep on HR. But yeah, if you Google Texas school districts, there's a few local ones who they've been calling out the news saying, look, I have been diagnosed even with a high risk health impairment of like diabetes. And the schools are not granting them accommodations because they're saying everybody needs to report on campus. So there is a lot of tension between teachers and the HR departments and the school districts. It's super heavy and it's really negative. And for me, whenever I'm sitting here saying like, let go of judgment, let go of blame, you have to do it over and over and over again and still focus on like, right now I'm sitting in my living room and I'm more okay than I'm not okay, you know, when it comes down to it. So I have to pause and come back to that whenever questions like this come up and that frustration starts to come up. I let go of what's out of my control and focus on what I can do instead.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. And I know that it brings up, and, you know, I can feel it. Like I can feel that. And this is what HR and Sanya's back on. And, you know, you're trying to deal with it all the time, like every day there's, you know, and you're trying to do what's right. I think up here, because of our human rights legislation and duty to accommodate and family status accommodation, which is to do with the parent-child relationship, there's a little bit of flexibility. And I think here, a lot of organizations are, you know, staying closed till January. But right there, I just want to take a pause. We need to probably take a deep breath, all of us, because it just brings up, you know, thinking about it and just bringing it up. So let's just do that for a second. We'll take a couple deep breaths. I have my mask here because I remember you were showing that Facebook putting on, you know, the teachers, and that's what you have to do sometimes. So just take a deep breath. I need to do this several times a day. And we need to start, you know, helping our children do that too. And, you know, I admire what you're doing, Cynthia, of bringing these things forward too, because if organizations don't realize, you know, what their obligations are and have a process in place to deal with accommodation, you know, there are, and I agree with you, whether you had a pre-existing condition or not shouldn't matter in this case. Like, it's what are you dealing with? What's the situation right now? I do have in a couple of my clients, some employees that do have, you know, diabetes or other, you know, serious immune deficiency issues. And you have to look at each situation. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear right now. So, I mean, this is good to have these discussions. I think, you know, what I found interesting though is, you know, this has been going on for 6 months with the schools, and then they had, you know, some time to kind of think they're going to open up, and yet here they were still struggling with setting up the online. I guess they in the secondary and a lot of the high schools, they weren't expecting a lot in some cases. So it's interesting that, you know, this online, and it wasn't set up. We've been doing it for 6 months, right? So I mean, Elizabeth, I see you sort of just thinking there, your thinking hat is on. Elizabeth is a colleague of mine. We used to work together, and she's in right now her Academy of Business Communications, and she does a lot of consulting on the employee communication side. And I'm sure you've been dealing with all of these challenges and how to even keep the dialogue open, like having leaders. What are you thinking about, just jumping in and hearing this?
Oh, I share your frustration just with the online learning, that we had 6 months to figure this out, and it was just a panic like for the last 2 weeks. And so that's kind of just blowing my mind. It just makes me want to bang my head on the table. But I'm actually, just as you're talking, I just got a study in today from one of my clients that they did, and they surveyed a few hundred workers, and these are people mostly white collar who were sent home in March, and they're sort of surveying them about returning to the workplace. And that's a lot of the work I'm doing, is how do you make people comfortable? And 1 in 4 are very, very worried about the safety of coming back to the workplace. And 70% overall are worried or somewhat worried. And so 7 in 10 workers are just, they're afraid, as you said, Helen. And there's such an obligation on the part of employers to acknowledge those fears and not just kind of go, just come in. We have a duty to make people feel like they come into a safe workplace, and whether that's a classroom or an office or a plant or a warehouse. And so I'm actually just looking at, and there are things that we, I guess, take for granted, is, they want to hear explicitly, yeah, there are face masks. Yes, there are signs. So if I forget my mask, I can get one. There's signs telling us how to act. You're considering that I might have to take public transit. People are terrified of public transit. And so many employees don't have cars or can't afford cars. So they're afraid of that. They're afraid of going to fitness facilities. And yet they need wellness more than ever. And in fact, a lot of them, this study shows that they're looking to their employers to offer virtual healthcare. So that they're both equally split between mental and physical health. And so they're saying, keep me well. If you're going to keep me home, keep me well. And if you're going to bring me in, keep me safe and keep me well. So it's a really interesting place that I think employers find themselves. And to a greater extent, I think, than ever before, as employers, we have a duty to support mental wellness. And we never really thought about that before, right? It was just, but more than 56% of home-based workers, I read, are suffering from some level of anxiety, depression, or stress. And that's massively higher than it was prior to this. So none of us, Helen, are sleeping particularly well. None of us, Cynthia, are feeling like it's okay. And yet we're being asked to kind of suck it up and get back into the workplace. So I think it's just a really, as you said, this is our dress rehearsal. And we've got to figure out how to get it right, and we've got to pay attention to what we're learning. So I will shut up now.
Oh no, thank you. That I would love to get that survey or study or whatever.
Yeah, they're actually publishing it today, so I will share the link out.
I actually will share. As I said, there was some resources, but I always have. This is the thing. I know Barbara was talking about learning technology, and I've been doing these things, and every single time I screw up something. Like I forgot to start recording, and we had a great intro and talk at the beginning. It's whatever. It's like you have to kind of let go, as you say, of what you can do. But I think it seems, I don't know what, Taylor, you don't have to speak, but when you see a lot, like do you think a lot of younger generation are actually practicing mindfulness or skills or breathing exercise and meditation and stuff? Because I just feel like it's sort of for people like me who didn't learn it till late, like I'm hoping that it's going to kind of start being the new reality to help. And I just was curious about your thoughts and any comment you wanted to make on what we've been chatting about, if you're okay
I definitely agree. Like I can only speak to like my friend group, my family, and kind of everybody that I've interacted with around my age, and it's definitely at the forefront. Like being like work-life balance, I feel, is more so a priority for 20-somethings than it was for like my parents. I feel just having the conversations with them, I feel like it was always like work, 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 and like that's what the weekends were for. And even kind of just like making sure like, oh, there's family time on the weekends, but I think with my generation, it's like 7 days a week work-life balance. At least like that's kind of the vibe that I get in terms of just talking to my friends who like as soon as they're working from home, as soon as the computer goes off, it's like they're taking time for themselves. They're going on a walk. They're practicing their mindfulness meditation. They're turning on Netflix and doing what they need to do. But I feel like a lot of people like my parents' age and even like my grandparents, it was more like kind of just like 5 days a week, kind of go, go, go. There's not that really downtime unless you consider it like dinner and maybe like the news at 6 o'clock and then you kind of go to bed. But I find definitely, especially in my life too, like I make time to do like exclusively self-care. And of course, I don't think that was in like the lexicon back in the day, like self-care. I had to discover what it was just in like university, what it consisted of and the language of it. But just from my experience, I definitely feel like my generation makes time and makes sure there's some sort of, self-care routine in their life, whether it's just like turning on Netflix for an hour or actually practicing like coping skills, yoga, all of the big heavy stuff kind of happening right now.
Well, that's great to hear, because that's the thing, even when Katie was home from university, I kept saying, try to, start trying this Calm app. I have the Calm app for meditation. Like start. There's a little series you can learn how to meditate a bit more, and I really want to start it younger. With my son, I think they're probably more resistant too, maybe, but it's too bad Bill didn't show up. He signed up. I always have these few men that sign up and then they never show up, but it's okay. But Cynthia, so we are getting close to, the hour, but I always love the dialogue. And I don't know if Louise, she's been quiet, but maybe she might want to have a question later or something. But some other thoughts from you, just again, to resource ourselves, because, Taylor and I talk a lot about this working together is, self-care is coming up all the time in a lot of what I send out. I mean, the whole work life, what I prefer to call work-life harmony, and the fact that, there's this mix of people, a lot of people, they still are at home. And our next session on September 30th, I think it is going to be about the back to work, because there is a bit of a push. But for just some other tips on managing, because the work life, if you're only at home, that's your how do you separate, and boundaries, and again some just techniques to kind of, do you breathe before every meeting? Do you, I would love to know some of your thoughts on that, Cynthia.
Yeah, so something for sure that I want to make sure that I communicate is one of my favorite practices is less is more. So almost all the time, if you're stressed, if you take away something, you're going to create a little bit more space for yourself. And one of my biggest frustrations with our current school schedule is that they're just mimicking what we've always done. The 8 to 4 schedule, 4 classes, hour and a half long, very short breaks. And we got a teacher group together last night to try to talk to our principal about how can we build in some downtime for students and teachers in this schedule now. We can call it, offline, whatever, but it needs to be something where people can close their screens, disconnect, to stay connected, right? So that way you're connecting to yourself, you're connecting to your environment, and you're not having this expectation. Parents who are thinking like, oh, my kid has to get straight A's and has to do all of these things, that needs to be rethought at this point. Because are straight A's the most important thing with everything else that's going on right now? Probably not. So that pressure needs to start de-escalating those expectations. As far as building a schedule or like ways to check in, one of my favorite things to do in group sessions is I have everybody write down their to-do list. So think about all the stuff that you need to do later this afternoon, or even tomorrow for Friday. What's your for sure need to get done? And then where are you on that list? Because most likely you're not on it at all. When we think of to-do lists, we think of check my email, respond to this person, take the mail out, like all of these tasks, but we very much forget to schedule time just for ourselves. So if you can start putting yourself at the top of your to-do list, that's how you can show up for your kids more, and that's how you can show up for your partner more. And then teachers can show up for their students a little bit more because they're setting that intention to connect to themselves, and then they can connect to other people in a little bit more of a mindful way. And then the other last thing, I've said this multiple times in my Instagram, one of the practices I like to offer is called a color practice. So if you are super stressed or your mind is starting to go to future thoughts and what you can't control, just look around the room and find 3 colors of the rainbow: red, blue, green, or yellow, orange, red. Just distracting your brain for that moment, because you're thinking about colors. You're not thinking about whatever else is going on. You can start to pause and slow down. And I've done that. One of my favorite examples is I thought I was going to miss a flight at LAX a couple of summers ago, and they had just closed the TSA line, and my mind started going, what if I miss my flight? What if I don't get home? What if this? And my face was getting hot. So then I just looked around and started looking for colors. I got on the plane. It was okay. It wasn't as bad as I was making it out to be. I just needed that space to kind of slow down. So yeah, I think less is more. Slow down, put yourself at the top of your to-do list, could really help in these moments.
Oh, those are great ones. I think everyone should just take a minute now and look around. And I just realized I probably need more color in here because I'm looking. So like, just do it real quick. It's kind of, I don't know, that I have never thought about that. I got some nice color behind me there too. I feel a little calmer actually, because I know there was some tense moments today. It's like when you start to think about it, I'm trying to, not only get out of my head, but, feel more, but that body awareness, like with Cullen and his chest tightening yesterday, I'll see how he's doing today, but I think I'm really going to make sure I'm modeling the self-care for him too, right? It's modeling as well. So, this has been great. I'm going to put up the slide for your resources in a second, but I just wanted to see if anybody else had any specific question. I'm glad to be back doing the mentor circles. I missed hitting record at the beginning. So if you missed it and you're watching this, it's Helen Patterson from Life Works Well. You can find us at lifeworkswell.ca, but it just hilarious. But oh, I hear something. I don't know what
it's
that was.
Louise. I just wanted to say I'm so sorry I was so late.
It's okay.
I had trouble connecting, but thank you. This has been wonderful and interesting, and I really appreciate all your thoughts. I have children at the other end of the spectrum. They're teenagers, and they're busting to get out. So it's I'm struggling to keep them home.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So you can watch the recording later, and there's some great tips. And I always send out to the distribution list. I'm just going to share my screen again real quickly for this, but for Cynthia, if you would like to get, these other resources, you can check these out later. Again, there was a lot of great there's a lot of stuff that's been posted. And again, if you don't know jack.org, it's a great organization. It started under, tough circumstances, but a great organization for supports, especially for university and college age students, but we can use a lot of that for younger as well. And then Cynthia Ruiz, thank you again for hopping on and sharing all of your knowledge. And if you have a chance to follow her on Instagram or Facebook, there's always some fun stuff out there and some great tips constantly that are shared. And I think, I always, when we first met, I loved that work stress less, because there's so much wrapped into that, right? About, the workplace, just having less stress. And I love that. I can see what's come out of that. And then for others, as I said, we're going to continue the series. So welcome for those who didn't make it before, and I hope to see you on some again. So reach out to Cynthia if you want to, if you have any questions. I am for next, for back to work, we'll have that in September. And then we're going to go back to basics, and I'm going to start, that'll be the start of another series. Really, I think a lot of this is just getting back to those basics on how to manage, you know, and I think self-care is going to be number one, but maybe we need to start simplifying things a little bit more, you know, with those pauses, and just maybe simplifying life in this chaotic time is going to help us stay grounded. So anyway, I hope everybody enjoyed today, and I really want to thank Cynthia again, and hope to see you in a couple weeks on the next one. As always, reach out if you have any questions. You know, thank you to the educators, you know, now and past, your commitment to, you know, enhancing education, and then even those sharing knowledge now. Elizabeth does some training, because, you know, the children are our future in a way, right? And thanks for everyone hopping on. I really appreciate it. So keep breathing, everybody. Keep breathing. And we'll see you again soon. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Ellen. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me.
Bye.
Bye.